at law. Joining me on the set is our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Hello to you, Doug.
I will.
There have been many attempts by Democrats to try and limit Donald Trump's authority to wage war with Iran, but they have all failed. Why is that?
Failed in the face of fierce Republican resistance. And why? Because there has not been a willingness in the Republican Party to confront Donald Trump on his executive authority, as he sees it, to wage war as he sees fit on his own terms. And this has been a pattern not just with war powers, but throughout this administration. Look, we just heard King Charles III this week in his speech to Congress in what you might say is a strong rebuttal to Donald Trump, even though he didn't explicitly say his name, that the Magna Carta inspired the U.S. system of checks and balances of each branch against the other. And what we're essentially seeing is, if not a blurring of the lines between those checks and balances, just, erasing them all together, taking out the eraser and just it's gone. Now, you might say that that's an overly simplistic take on the reason that each effort by Democrats, and it is exclusively Democrats, 6 times in the Senate, at least 2 times in the House, have tried to bring these measures over the past 60 days to at least try to advance a vote. Not to actually vote, but just to have the vote on having Congress be able to do what the War Powers Act was supposed to ensure that it did, which was give the president, basically force the president to withdraw forces to terminate a military operation after 60 days with the provision of a perhaps 30-day extension, so 90 days, unless Congress expressly authorized it, an extension of what was originally written in the Constitution, right? The Constitution expressly gives Congress, not the president, the authority to declare war. That is a direct quote, to declare war. So the Republicans right now are trying to hide under the cover of the fact, well, this isn't really, a hard deadline anyway, this 60-day deadline. The Democrats are making a big deal of it. But in fact, because the War Powers Act provides for this ability of the president to invoke a 30 extra day extension, the real deadline will be sort of punted down towards the end of May. My sense is that there are a lot of Republicans who want the Congress to have some say in this, who do want to have congressional authority. They do see the potential clash and contradictions with the way Donald Trump is handling this war, and the fact that there has been no vote in Congress or even a fainted a vote. They see that. It's not that all the Republicans are marching in monolithic lockstep here. They do see there are fissures within the party on this issue, but a lot of Republicans, perhaps the vast majority of the party, are hoping that the issue will essentially vanish of itself because they're praying that these so-called negotiations, at least what Donald Trump says are going to be negotiations with Iran, are somehow going to pan out and bring the war to an end before they have to face that hard 30-day, that 90-day deadline at the end of May. So they're basically carry on, nothing to see here with this 60-day deadline. They're saying it's sort of irrelevant. The president's in the midst of a war right now, and there's a ceasefire, and there's negotiations, plus he has that 30-day extension. So a message essentially is the Democrats are making much ado about nothing. But my sense is that the Republicans do realize that there is a potential clash and a real contradiction and tension with the constitutional prerogative right on the horizon, the prerogative to declare war and the prerogative of Congress to oversee how that war is waged.
Any precedent to this, Doug?
There are precedents. In fact, I'll tell you something that might raise a few eyebrows. Every single president in the 53 years since the War Powers Act was passed in 1973, right, born out of the Vietnam War, which was a complete fiasco, and they said, we have to find a way for Congress to reassert that constitutional authority. So thus was born the War Powers Act. Every single president since then, including Barack Obama, has decided to either ignore the War Powers Resolution or make little of it, belittle it. And what do I mean by that? Well, Barack Obama basically continued military operations in Libya back in 2011. You might remember that NATO-led campaign in Libya to try to loosen Gaddafi's reign on power at the time. And he basically did not seek any congressional approval. He basically ignored that whole war powers controversy at the time. We had back in 1950, Harry Truman, post-war president, basically sending Americans into the Korean War. Over 33,000 American troops died in that war. He never once sought any sort of War Powers Act or congressional approval. This is what's really fascinating. If you do the deep dive into U.S. history, because it's easy to just pile in on Trump. Oh, he's blowing off all the checks and balances and all the congressional authority, which he is. But it doesn't mean that in the past, the only times that Congress did on 11 occasions in American history did actually declare, they exercised that congressional declaration role to authorize and declare war. However, it was done first in 1812, I believe, when the British burned the White House down. And then it was done again when they declared war against Germany and Japan in 1941. So the last time the formal use of constitutional authority that Congress really exerted it and formally declared war, you have to go back to World War II. Since then, it's been sort of mixed messages or half measures. They've sort of said they haven't approved the war, but they've given funding to the war in some cases. But it's been very ambiguous and not clear-cut at all. And this is why legal scholars are having a field day with this, because it is not straightforward.
Yeah, not straightforward. Is it also, is it a bit of it symbolic? Because this war powers law, at the end of the day, Donald Trump still has a veto.
Yeah, it's not just symbolic in this case. You might just say that the entire thing's for naught. The reasons that, because you're absolutely right, even if this were to come to a vote, the War Powers Act, and Congress was actually to put Donald Trump's war against Iran to a vote for approval, which isn't going to happen right now, given the numbers and the math in Congress, the calculus there. But if it were, it could go right back. Donald Trump would surely, with a 99.99999% certainty, he'd veto it. And the problem there, Will, as you probably know, is that in order to override, that is to nullify a presidential veto in any act, you need 2/3 of Congress. I'll leave you to do the numbers, given what the Republican majorities right now in Congress are. It's just not happening. So there is a symbolic aspect to this. The Democrats would argue that doesn't alleviate them of their duty, their obligation as they see it, to put pressure on the president to wage this war with congressional oversight. They say that even if they know that this is not going to come to a vote, or that every war powers resolution they try to bring up for a vote, and I just said there's been at least 8 of them so far in the House and in the Senate. Even if they know that, they feel it's incumbent on them as a party to continue to put pressure on a president that, in their view, has continually done an end run around congressional and legislative oversight of the executive branch. So they see it as their constitutional obligation to exercise Congress's constitutional duty. That's how the Democrats would see it.
All right, Doug, thank you very much. Douglas Herbert, our international affairs editor.